Okay. Hello, everyone. We're trying a slightly different lighting setup. I'm sure the glare of my glass is going to be a little bit worse, but I don't know if this is better or worse or whatever, so I figured I'd just try it, let you guys let me know. But ignoring all that, let's move on to the blog. So, when last we left, war had been declared for the first time in the known history of my setting, and the party was. The party took quite some time reacting to this news and reached a point where they effectively didn't know what to do next in any way, shape, or form. They were just like, we can't handle this right now. We do not have the capacity to actually deal with this properly. They all had thoughts about it, of course. But ultimately, they decided their first priority needed to be getting out of Al Jalima as quickly as possible. Because Al Jalima had been put into a lockdown to prevent people from fleeing and for various other reasons. So, first thing they did, you'll forgive me for skipping over some of the details here, because, for example, one of the other things people did was tried to get a hold of the post office, or go, tried to uh, contact someone, get a message out through the soldiers, anything basically. Didn't really have a lot of success on any of these fronts. They ended up going to the local outer order outpost, during which they made a deal with the local individual in charge of that, whose name I can't remember right now. And he basically said, look, if what you're telling me is true and that you're actually on an urgent mission, they basically convinced him that they were on a mission of some urgency. And whether or not that's a lie or not, I guess is probably debatable. And he said, I'll try to pull some strings. I happen to know the local distributor. So the next morning they had a meeting with the distributor. His name was Renaz of Seaspear. He's a troll. Now, I'm going to pause for just a moment to discuss something in brief. I've talked about the Nevere politics and situation and organization in another video, but one thing I didn't really mention was the distributors. You see, a mayor is in charge of their town, a governor is in charge of the state, and so forth and so on. There's different levels like that, but basically none of these individuals are concerned with the nation of Nevere. Well, actually, it'd be more like this: the nation of Nevere. They are concerned with their particular area. That is their purview, their area of interest, their what it is that their God, there's a word for that. Whatever. That's the part that they actually care about, is the local area. The distributors are actually the first rank and one of the only ranks throughout the whole Nevere government that actually deal with the Nevere as a whole. Each distributor is in charge of a region, which crosses over state boundaries on purpose, because a governor will always think of their state. I mean, yes, the governor has a seat within the council and can and discuss matters of the country, but ultimately they are going to be spending pretty much 90% of their waking hours dealing with issues of their state. The distributors then have to deal with issues that cross the entire country, and that's one of the reasons they're called that, and also why their regions are, so differently divided. So, anyways. Theoretically speaking, a distributor is a higher rank than a governor, but that's only really on paper, because a distributor is more like a different classification of rank, if you know what I mean. So, Renaz of Seaspear is out, happens to be in Al Jalima at the time, and is talking with a great many number of citizens, as you might imagine, given the current circumstances and the fact that, a lot of people are concerned about the Nevere Confederacy declaring war on anybody, let alone Stonehold. After a bit, the party does manage to get his attention. As they're discussing with him, at least two party members get this really strange impression that they're being watched, by an elf, specifically, if it matters. And they're not sure what to make of that, but given the events of late, they decide to go ahead and be a little more cautious and just a little bit of a exercising there of a little extra caution. The distributor says from what he understands from the order individual, they want to get out. He says, no problem, I can make this work for you if you do a favor for me. The party's like, okay, we were kind of expecting that. What is it you want us to do? The distributor wants them to go north to the town of Karath, a mining town, I'll describe it more in a little bit, and talk with his son, who happens to be the mayor of Karath. Now, he doesn't know exactly what's going on because he's been rather busy, but from what he understands, the mayor's political career is kind of doing a downturn. He's kind of losing the loyalty of the populace, but not really. It's just sort of a strange situation, and he's been acting rather unusually lately in general. And he comes across as acting like he's basically concerned for the career of his son, but you can tell that Renaz does actually care for the well-being of his son and wants the best for him. So the party goes ahead and agrees and says sure. Renaz also adds that he will, of course, be sending a small detachment of troops that will go with the party to there. Now, I say the of course because it's not actually for their protection, it's to make sure they keep up their end of the bargain. So the party leaves basically immediately, and they go head north along the path. Now, as they're going north, several party members constantly, well, I shouldn't say constantly, at several occasions, feel like there is someone following them or watching them or whatever. But here's this weird part. They never get negative or positive confirmation on this. They never actually find anyone, nor do they ever actually see, oh, it was just a wolf or a coyote or whatever. They just see nothing. They find nothing. And so the party's starting to get a little bit on edge by the time they get to Karath. Karath, which takes a good portion of the first half of the day in order to reach, is a mining town. Now, I haven't actually described this properly yet, so I'm going to kind of do this right here, if you'll forgive me briefly. On the eastern edge, I guess this is from my perspective, on the eastern edge of the Navari is this long mountain chain called the Reach, the Far Reach Mountains. And most of what they've been doing for the last several sessions has been at the northern end, in the mountains, or on the mountains, or going through the mountains, that sort of thing. For example, Al Jalima is situated right up there amongst the cliffs and whatnot. Karath is closer to the northern tip and is actually in a ravine, chasm sort of situation where the town is built in, and then the walls, which have the houses and shops and whatnot, are built into either side. It is a mining town, as I mentioned earlier, a very wealthy one actually. Still pretty new though. It's only been around for a few years at this point. And Forith, the mayor I mentioned earlier, is actually pretty much the only mayor this place has ever had. He was here when this place was founded. It's one of the reasons he's still in charge, because there's a lot of loyalty to him. So, party gets there and they decide to go ahead and get a good night's sleep. Wake up, have some pancakes and some strawberries, I believe, and decide to start looking through the town. Now, you'll forgive me for not detailing all of the little individual tidbits that happened, because there were quite a few for this session. I'm just going to kind of go over the things in general. One of the first things the party did was they went to investigate the mayor's office. Duh, right? Now, on their way to the mayor's office, they had a little bit of a problem getting to see him, because he was a little bit on the busy side. When they finally did see him and started talking about talk to him about the situation, he was very evasive, and he didn't actually tell them basically anything. In the middle of the conversation, a young troll woman came up, named Tarsala of Firetree. She comes in and is like, oh my gosh, but she wasn't expecting there to be people there, and she has this air of obviously not, trying to figure out something to say that she was there for, and not, and pretending that she wasn't actually in some kind of a rush or there for some sort of emergency or whatever. And he just kind of brushes her away with what the party believes to be a lie, and then they leave. So now the party's really getting suspicious. Between everything that's been happening, the being watched and another thing, they also find out amongst the populace that while the mayor's been doing a good job, especially lately, for the past several months, he's just been acting so strange. And after a little bit more digging, they find out that there have been shipments coming in under orders from the mayor's office itself, heading straight to the mines under actual Navari guardsmanship. Now, that by itself is not necessarily unusual. In brief, forgive me for going into the politics of the situation again, but the way it works is there's the Navari Mining Guild, okay? Or just the Mining Guild, as most people call it, because there's only really one of any real note in the whole planet. It's the one in Navari, and they have a contract with the Navari governorship. And what it is they basically have carte blanche and a monopoly, for all intents and purposes, over all the mining across all of Navari. The catch is they have to tithe a percentage of their resources, the straight resources themselves, not money, but the actual resources they mine, to the Navari government, which itself can occasionally give some of that to the military as well for their usage. So the mining guild sending guards and armed official guards and shipments into a mine is not actually that unusual. The fact that it's connected to the mayor, slightly more unusual, because other than that connection I mentioned, the mining guild and the governorship don't really interact all that much on an official level. I mean, obviously, it's like, hey, we're mining this, and here's what we got, but that's it, you follow me? So that's just a little bit unusual. Not too much. While they're there, they also discover that there is a surprisingly large number of guards in the mine. Again, this is not actually all that unusual because this is a wealthy mine. This is a place where they mine aluminum. Excuse me, there are emerald veins that they find here, several other gemstones, including amber. I'm sorry, not amber, topaz and diamond, as well as a great deal of gold, copper, tin, that sort of thing, more mundane metals along those lines. And of course, there are a few veins of pyrrole in this area. So, in other words, none of this is actually unusual. I'm mentioning this to you, to the audience, because I want you to understand the viewpoint of my players at this point. I have been accused of GMing as much for my players or my viewers as I have for the characters, and that is admittedly a little bit true. And I will freely admit now, with the moment having passed, that I was doing all this to try and highlight the atmosphere of this town. This town, by all intents and purposes, is completely normal, and everything going on in it that looks unusual has a reasonable explanation. And all of this put the players on an extremely high level of tension. Well, I shouldn't say extremely, but they were rather tense, and paranoid, I think is a good word for that. At least that was my impression. Feel free to correct me, guys, because, you tend to do that. So, they're investigating. They find a few other little tidbits and details. One of the things my favorite parts is Tabrin and Coulson, I believe, both try to talk to the mayor because they're actually interested in making this whole job work. So, they came here on a mission for the distributor, and they want to convince Mr. Forth that, you need to shape up. And they do ask around, and like I said, he's just been weird lately. They're still in favor of him. They're not going to oust him. They just want him to shape up a bit. He's been really hard to reach lately, too. And so they talk to him and they're like, look, and they convince him that he really needs to truly put himself into his passion in life, that if he doesn't actually care about something, that he needs to do it, because what they're trying to do is, what they perceive is that the mayor, specifically, Mr. Forth, is being pushed into his political career by his father. Now, whether that's true or not is not known, but it certainly does seem to be that way, doesn't it? And so he seems to be showing just general lackluster interest in this, and he's been pursuing other things, whatever those may be. So they're like, okay, look. And they try to give him a pep talk, and they finally convince him that he needs to follow, he needs to choose his own path and not follow the path of his father. Good job on that part, nice diplomacy. Zeiss, the rogue, manages to sneak his way into the mine quite a ways, actually, far farther than I thought he would get. And he's just trying to investigate to see what's in there. On his way through, he is caught and tries to talk his way out, nearly gets attacked because the miners are really paranoid about the miners' guards are really paranoid about some random rogue being down here. And he's like, oh, I was just here for the tour, which they know is a lie. And so they literally threaten him at a spear point, you need to get out. So Zeiss leaves. I can't remember if he actually made a second attempt or not to go back in, but either way, he decided it was not a good idea and decided to follow up on other leads. One of the next things they did was they went and talked with the local lieutenant in charge of in charge of basically the garrison that's here. His name was Tornto of the Bleeding Hollow clan, I believe. He was an orc. Now, and yes, I know the clan name sounds familiar. We've been over this. Tornto, put simply, he has his own suspicions and has had his own suspicions regarding this whole situation, because it's setting off that little intuition thing in the back of his mind. He's just got a tickle there, but he's had no evidence or cause to look into it. However, when the party talks to him and lays everything out, and he realizes that these are members of the Order. Now, I know I've probably emphasized this before, but just to re-emphasize it, the Order has a great deal of personal clout, because there's people greatly respect the Order, a great deal of political clout, and a great deal of economic clout. And so he takes their request seriously and decides that even though he doesn't have any actual evidence, he is willing to go ahead and pursue an investigation based on their go ahead, basically. They have to vouch. Well, they didn't actually vouch, but you get the point. If whatever they find, they have to take responsibility for it, and he will say, I was just following the directives of the Order individuals, the members of the Third Wing here, of the 113th Adjunct, blah, 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 blah. So they're like, okay, yeah, sure. They start to investigate and see what they find. One of the interesting things is they have this very, very niggling suspicion that they're being watched in the town. This is probably starting to sound a little bit familiar. Um, they talk to the soldiers who escorted them here, and they're pretty sure that someone has been keeping an eye on the township, the mining town, from one of the rocky crags nearby, because they've never actually been able to find anyone, and their patrols haven't found anyone. But they just keep feeling like they keep seeing something out there, and it's really unlikely that such a repeated incident would be like a creature or beast or whatever. So they're on high alert too. The soldiers are. The soldiers have also alerted the guard of the town, which is now on high alert, and they also mentioned this to Toronto, who is now on high alert. So the whole group is just kind of the tension starts to get really, really fine. Now, the next few events basically happened at the same time. I was literally GMing for the three groups of the party as the party split up simultaneously. Some of the party went with Toronto into the mines to investigate. Some of the party went to find the mayor, and some of the party went to find the woman who brushed in earlier, thinking she was connected to whatever's going on. We'll start with the mines. The group that went in there talked with Toronto for a bit. They found out he was actually a veteran. There's a specific term for it. I don't remember what I came up with at the time. But essentially, he is someone who has retired, but retains his military rank as sort of an honorary thing. So he is, even though he is merely a lieutenant, he actually carries the rank of a captain, for example. But that rank of a captain isn't official. It is there to denote that he is retired, and they have honored him with that, and he gets the salary and pay of a captain as his retirement while he does the work of a lieutenant. Follow? And he's got, his campaign badges and whatnot over here for all the monster and campaigns and whatnot. He actually fought against the Gotrok, for example, just to name one example there. But they talk to him and they find out a few things. They also find out that there's a chunk of the wall in the mines, just in the actual mines themselves. They come across a thing in the third level where the wall seems to be unusual. And after looking at it for a bit more, they discover that it's a magical door of some kind. And Toronto's like, soldier? Soldier runs up. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Why is there a hidden door right here? I don't know, sir. Why don't you know this, sir? Soldier. I don't know, sir. I'll go get the captain. Why don't you do that? And so he goes off to get the captain and rouse some more soldiers. And Toronto says, I'm going to go ahead and stay here and watch this. And Snarg and I believe Hanuel also both say they're going to stay here and watch this and analyze it. What they discover, in brief, is that this door, this portal, this gateway, whatever you want to call it, is a soul-tied gate. Now, I know I've described this in brief before, but allow me to go over this again, just because it's been a while and I want you to understand the significance of this. A soul tie is something that is relatively well known. It's not a rare procedure, but it's so difficult and or costly to do that basically nobody does it unless they really need something to be secure. A soul tie is when a door or a portal or a hole or a bag or a case or a key or a lock or whatever is sealed magically such that only someone who that seal is tied to can open it. And it's called the soul tie because it doesn't actually connect to the person, it connects to the soul of that person. Now there's all sorts of complications with that could happen that I'm not going to go into now. I'm sure you can think of the implications right now. But the important part is a soul tie is incredibly strong. There's only three real ways to get around one. Have the soul in question present and alive, by the way, in case you're wondering. Be sufficiently powerful to simply overwhelm the lock, or be sufficiently skilled to overwhelm the lock, or some combination of these three. These are the only real ways. There might be other ways to get around this. I have not thought of any myself, but as usual, I like to leave that sort of open in case my players come up with something clever. It's happened before. Regardless, they find this soul-tied thing, and they know the significance of that. So they're like, okay, this is big. We need to be on the down low. We need to deal with this right now. So part of the group, which I know consists of Zeiss, I don't remember who else went, but I know it was Zeiss and Dara, so they could keep an eye on them, and Rory, our human barbarian friend, go to meet the woman, and Coulson, Kazrinthka, and I believe Tabrin go to check up on the mayor. Now, the mayor's office is virtually abandoned when they get there, and so they're like, well, shoot. What are we going to do? And they find out that in the last few minutes, the mayor, Mr. Forth, has announced he's going to have a big announcement in the middle of town. So much of the populace has gathered there, including the mayor himself. So they're like, all right, let's go. Whatever. I'm going to cover what happens to them first, even though these two events are basically happening side by side. It's less complicated than just hopping back and forth. So they go to the event, and the mayor announces very briefly that he is stepping down as mayor. He will stay on as mayor until they find a replacement for him, until they elect, basically, a new replacement mayor. But he is going to be stepping down. He is going to be pursuing personal interests and trying to engage in the career he's always wanted, things like that. He apologizes to his people, and he mentions that he is open for questions or whatnot. All sorts of things like that. The party's a little surprised by this, and it takes them a little while to get his ear. Now, I'm going to point out that he actually has several bodyguards with him at this point. So the party contacts him, and in typical total lack of subtlety, they basically confront him full tilt about what's going on, and they say, there's a secret door, and blah, blah, blah. And he does not react well. He as they're talking to him initially, he's just like, yeah, I feel this is the right way, and going. He's perfectly amiable, perfectly friendly, and just kind of chatting with them about the subject until they mention the door in the mine which they've found. At that point, he completely clams up, just like that, except a little harder. There we go, just like that. And there's a noise too. No, and he's like, okay. And he starts to get a little bit confrontational, and Coulson, I remember this part specifically because this is when things started to go a little bit bad, and I was really afraid, especially given what was happening in the other place at the time, that the party was going to end up in jail this night. But Coulson actually puts his arm around him and just kind of starts guiding him away, but Forreth refuses to move. And so there's kind of this awkward budging situation, and it looks just a bit odd. And those bodyguards I mentioned start to get a little bit tense, and they start to reach for their weapons and move a little bit closer. So after a little bit, the group kind of finally convinces themselves, okay, we're gonna let you go. And you know what? Hang on, I want to pull up a line because one of the things Coulson said is wonderfully beautiful, and I'll explain why later. Give me just a moment here. I actually do have the thread here. I was rereading it to remind myself of some of the details. Pardon me, give me just a moment. I'm a couple pages past where these events happened. No. Here we go. Where's Coulson? There we go. Coulson's got a big red mage avatar on his post, so it's really easy to find. So Forreth wants to know, he asks you, what have you learned? Coulson's response is, please sir, just come with us to the mine and explain. We don't have to be enemies. This doesn't have to be a fight. I think you are a good man trying to do the right thing, and if it's truly the right thing, you'll have no problems talking about it, yeah? Forreth refuses to budge. He stares at you, demanding an answer. He stares at Coulson, demanding an answer, and they're just like, okay, now what do we do? Then Coulson responds, sir, I will let you go for now, but this isn't over. You've proven by your actions right here that you are up to no good. Just know that I will make it my personal mission to stop you and whoever is helping you. And then he puts his arm down and steps away from the mayor. Now, all of this is very much acceptable behavior from the party. In fact, this is not what I was expecting. This is kind of what I was hoping for. Because ignoring the fact that the party has encountered no less than 3 conspiracies that they're aware of, and I phrase that way specifically, thus far in the campaign, but they've also been kind of in the dark about most of these, and in several of these cases they kind of ended up, I'm not going to say messing up so much as they didn't have an optimal end resultant, because they weren't going full bore. They weren't trying their hardest in order to succeed at these things. They were letting people, talk them out of things. They were, well, we could go after him now, or we could wait, or we could try and do this. They were holding back up until now. So Coulson and his actions and the actions of the other party members at this point, because he's not the only one, are very understandable. It's like, okay, we found another conspiracy. We're going after this one. We're going after it right now, and we're going to stop it right now, and we're not holding back. Forreth asks if they're after a witch hunt. And Coulson's response to that is the last one I'll read for you word by word, if you'll give me just a moment. Sir, you are acting suspiciously and not being particularly forthcoming about secret doors in a heavily guarded military area, and you ask us about witch hunts. It's an unknown paired with a suspicious activity, all operating together with very similar to a conspiracy that has led your nation to war with Stonehold. Oh, by the way, this happens literally the day after the war was declared, so Just add that to the pile of reasons why the party's acting this way. So he says, a witch hunt is the least of your troubles. He eventually decides he'll go ahead and let them go down there. Hang on just a second. I'm trying to... Okay, never mind. So, sorry about the delay. He says he needs to discuss something with someone. So he heads off towards the mayor's office, and of course the party follows that group of the party. While this is happening, the group at the mine is just listening to Toronto and learning more about the setting. Forgive me for kind of glossing over that. I've kind of told you most of the details in other summarizations. Wonderful role-playing, though. Awesome stuff, awesome stuff. Meanwhile, at the office, or rather, while that previous event was happening, at the office they find that Tarcella of Firetree, the woman I mentioned earlier, the troll woman, is in her office just kind of not actually doing any work. She's just kind of staring into space thinking. And the party shows up and they're like, hey, and she's like, hey, what can I do for you? And in typical idiom, Zeiss approaches her full tilt right to the face. We know you're hiding something in the mine and we don't know what's going on with this, blah, blah, blah. Total, utter, complete lack of tact, right? And so she immediately just gets this look of abject horror in her face. And she's like, whatever it is you're here for, I'm not going to help you with it. And they're like, no, you don't understand, ma'am. You're going to help us with this. And I mentioned Rory was in this group. I'm not going to go over the whole conversation, but this went south very quickly. Within a very short period of time, let's get a little closer. There we go. Within a very short amount of time, the conversation descends from that point to her being abjectly terrified and the group actively intimidating her, with her insisting that they will have to kill her because she refuses to do whatever it is they agree with. Now, Rory has had an understanding as of this point of what a soul tie is, and as I mentioned, if you have the soul and it is alive, you can open the door, right? So Rory gets out his chains. Iron chains, and he's like, and rolls intimidates like, we're gonna have to drag you there the hard way, I'm afraid. And he does it with this complete lack of anything. Just, I guess we'll just have to drag you there and open the door our way. And I'm probably not doing that correctly. Rory probably doesn't approve of that impression. Forgive me. I'm not that good at being intimidating. What can I say? Unless I'm actually. So the woman at this point grows absolutely terrified and starts screaming for the guards, which, by the way, are in audio range, and the party apparently completely forgot about. So the guards come rushing in as quickly as they can. Rory grabs the chains. It's like, oh god, hide them. and the party's like, oh my god, we're going to jail. And the guard shows up, says, what's happening? And they go to attack, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but all the guards, this is probably true across the nation, but especially here, the guards are very much tense because, if you paid attention earlier, I mentioned this was at the northern end of the reach, the mountain chain. That puts it very close to the border of Stonehold. So, actually, one of the closest areas you can get to Stonehold in the Al-Jalima estate. So, yeah, they're a little tense, and they immediately rush in, see the group, and they're like, you come peacefully or else we'll kill you, basically, is what they say. And then they belatedly add, even if you're from Stonehold, the law still applies, and we won't harm you if you come peaceably, but if you won't, we will kill you. And the party's like, oh god, what do we do? And they're like, okay, diplomacy rolls. Hang on, grab the dice here. My d20. Diplomacy rolls, oh my god, please don't kill us. Please don't take us in. And they do some incredibly fast backpedaling and sweet talk and diplomatizing, and finally manages to convince the guards that, no, sorry, this is just an understanding. Nothing's going on, sir, we're all fine down here, thanks. How are you? It was a wonderfully horrific situation. As the GM, I'm just sitting here like, oh my god, the whole time. God, I've got really bad bags under my eyes. So, as I was saying, let's get rid of that so it's not distracting. There we go. It's still kind of hard to look up at the camera, I'm still getting used to that. So, finally they convince the guards to leave, and by leave I mean go about 5 feet that way outside the hallway and stand there on high alert, because this is incredibly suspicious and they're already tense. And they start talking to the woman, and she's basically tells them, if you don't leave, I'm going to call for them again. and they're getting absolutely nowhere with her. And finally, they decide we'll go ahead and abandon this project because this is not going on. We don't. Basically, what the conversation boiled down to, out of character, was this probably is not worth making an enemy of, you know, the local military in order to make an issue of this and going to jail for this and possibly worse. So they start to leave, and as they're leaving, the mayor shows up with the rest of the party and is like, "What's going on?" And he's really confused because there's these guards here, there's the rest of the party, and there's Tarcella, who, by the way, at this point is actually her face is stained with tears because of how horrified she's been about this whole situation. And he reaches her and says, he says, with the party there and the revelation that they are members of the order, which he gets from the guard, he realizes that the jig is up and it's time to go ahead and face the music. So he grabs her hand and says, "Let's go ahead and face this together." And she says, "Okay," and the two quietly walk off. Don't acknowledge the party, just walk off. The party follows them, and they head to the mine, pretty, weapons at the ready because they don't know if this is a trick. The two open the hidden wall within the mine and head in. Uh, Believe it or not, much of the campaign up to this point, not all of it of course, but a large portion of the campaign up to this point, has been in service of this storyline. This is one I was building up towards up to this point. I apologize because I feel like I haven't fully gotten across the implications, the emotions, the gravitas of these scenes and what's been happening in them. But the overall point to be taken away here is that the party feels like they have finally... the party is at a point where they have finally gotten to the roots of one of these conspiracies, one of these organizations, and they believe they're finally going to... the things are going to start unraveling. This will be their hint. This will be their in. And from here they'll be able to figure out what happened, back with... Al-Karath, I think, and what happened with the back at Al-Irat, and they're gonna find out all this stuff. And they're gonna learn what's going on, and it probably has something to do with the war. This is great. So they open the door, they go through, and they find what is effectively looking like a laboratory, an extremely expansive and expensive laboratory with lots of Imperial inlaid and Imperial designed equipment, and a little gnome running around, a little gnome gentleman, old gentleman, very old. His name is Wizzle of Cogspanner. Now, of course, that doesn't mean anything to you, but I immediately described to the party that Wizzle of Cogspanner is a relatively famous gnome, because he is a white mage, doctor, inventor type person who several decades ago made it his life's mission to study desolation and what they could do about it. Now I'm going to pause for a moment and describe something. Well, no, I'm going to go ahead and discuss what they discover elsewise in there, then I'll pause. As they go further in, Tarcella and Foreth reveal a extremely young troll baby, probably no more than a couple months old, if that, laying in a little crib, just kind of playing around. There's a couple instruments monitoring her, but otherwise she looks unharmed. Several of the party members realize, just like that. And some of the party members are like, "Oh my god," but the one that really catches on first is Hanuel. You see, Hanuel is a fairy, and fairies, as part of their normal vision, have element sight. In other words, they can see such things completely by default. And a fairy can always, 100% of the time, see a desolate. And Hanuel sees that the child is in fact a desolate. Eliarchia is her name. She took the clan name of Seaspear, so Eliarchia of Seaspear. And she is a desolate girl. Desolate of water, specifically. Now I'm going to pause. I know I've talked about desolation before, but this is the first time it really actually came across the interest and relevance of both the campaign and the party. It hasn't really left since, I might add. Desolation is qualified as a disease, even though it's more magical in nature than anything, that someone... Okay, all life within this setting, and I do mean all biological life in general, so plants, animals, etc., have elemental energy in their substance. It's what makes them up, And it's actually true for non-organic or non-living life as well, or not living life, non-living things as well. For example, in Dareth, this would show signs of being made of whatever. I mean, I'd say the obvious thing, water, but no, with all sincerity, this plastic here may have traces of fire element within it. This cap may have traces of life element within it, etc., right? And what causes that varies wildly. Nobody's actually 100% sure who, what, why, where, and for what purpose. But what they do know is that's pretty much universal. A desolate is someone who does not have that elemental energy within them. Now, there are some obvious problems with that from the get-go, but there's this little snag that anyone else interacting with a desolate tends to find that desolate, well, in contempt, I think is the way I want to put that. They are naturally inclined to hate them. Now, this applies to everything, by the way. Yes, there are such a thing. This is actually asked very recently of me by one of my players. Is there such a thing as a desolate animal? Is there such a thing as a desolate plant? The answer is yes. A desolate animal will probably be dead at a very young age, killed by the other animals around it, out of hatred and fear. A desolate plant will wither and die because animals will not help it gestate or function or anything, and it will not be able to gain as much nutriment from the soil, etc. And of course, desolate people arguably have it worst of all. In much older times, before the Dericost Accord, one of the common practices was to simply fling desolate children as they were discovered out, just out the door, or out of the town, actually more accurately, and just leave them there. Nowadays, in more civilized time, they usually banish them instead, to a place that is known to be in the Dyers, but they're not sure where exactly. It's called Segregate. That's where all the monsters can go. Be with the other rest of your ilk. That sort of a thing. Desolates are not well thought of, and any desolate who is found is almost immediately ostracized, literally, publicly, culturally, familially, friendshiply, economically, in just about every way. The reaction to a desolate varies wildly. It can be literally violent. It can be simple, loathing or hatred or whatnot like that. It can manifest through something more passive or passive-aggressive, if you will. Like, for example, denying a desolate a job or a promotion or a raise or forcing them to work for pennies. That kind of a thing. Desolates in general have kind of a hard lot in life in this existence. Now, there's one thing I want to add. Obviously, one of my players mentioned, actually several of my players have mentioned, that one of the major themes of this campaign is, for lack of a better term, bias, prejudice, whatever a better word is for that, the idea of looking down or up upon someone because they are different or because they are blah. No one suffers more than that than the Desolates, but the Desolates have a slight problem. Obviously, there's a lot of cultural problems with the Desolates, and given that the closest thing to a religion that this setting has is the elements and the order, it's not really surprising that people would think of them negatively regardless. But on top of that, forgive me for finally getting to the point, they literally have there's a magical, basically, innate quality to them that makes these things happen. There's a reason even animals will hunt down and kill other desolates. There's a reason even plants will not be able to function properly as a plant. There's a reason all of this is the way it is. It's because desolates are naturally so different from all other life in that innate, in their framework, that everything else rejects them. And how that rejection manifests is different, as I've tried to highlight. In game terms, any player who encounters a desolate has to roll a will save. Now the difficulty of this will save, the DC, varies wildly based on exact specific circumstances. The individual in question, the other individual in question, and all the relationships and information between the two. So I had everyone roll a will save, and it was a different DC for just about all of them, really. All of them succeeded to my shock. I really wasn't expecting them all to succeed that. But in other words, as weird as this is going to sound, again, from a gameplay perspective, if you succeed at a will save, you get to decide how you react to them. That may still be negatively. Again, there are still cultural implications here. There are still societal implications here. But if you fail at the DC, I determine how you react to them. And it's always going to be negative. This is the big secret that he has been carrying, that Mayor Forth has been carrying. The reason why they have been so obstinate and been refusing, and so secretive and refusing so much of the activities of the party, why they've been acting so suspiciously, is because they have been hiding a secret that they were so afraid would get out, because if it did, then it would be ruined the moment it did. That baby's life would be ruined the moment that secret got out. And their child was more important to them than basically anything else. The party goes ahead. The party is ashamed. 100% of the party members. It was one of the best sessions I've ever had. The party was just like, oh my god. Oh my god. And several of them apologized to the group. They gave them money in order to help the young girl's future and help the research and whatnot, and so forth and so on. The only party member who wasn't affected at all was Zeiss, but as we've covered, he's hideously evil, so that's not really a surprise. Zeiss went to Wizzle, our good friend of Cogspanner, the gnome, and started asking him some questions about a few things, like the mirror key they had, for example, and a few other things like that. They basically find nothing out. One of the things they do determine, ironically, is that the mayor has absolutely no idea about anyone following them, or indeed following him. So that whole thing about them being followed on the way here either was a red herring, or is still going on. On top of this, well, I don't really have much else to add here. This scene went on for a while. Like I said, it was one of my favorite sessions we've ever had. But there's not much I can say without just reciting it. You know, it was all role-playing. The party really understood the gravity of this thing. Forgive me for summarizing, but the single most important point here, this was very difficult for me to set up as a GM. The point was to make the party in a situation where they were the unwitting perpetrators of this problem. They understood now more directly and personally the plight of a desolate, not by being one, or by seeing one, or by hearing a story, but by being on the other side of the group who was, again, perpetrating this prejudice, this negative bias against bigotry, that's a good word, against the desolates. They were part of the problem. Obviously, they did not have malicious intent in mind, but that's my point. It doesn't require malicious intent to be a part of the problem. It doesn't require, I hate you. It doesn't even require understanding of the situation. Simply by being involved, they made things worse. Now, of course, the party then was able to rectify this because they all made their will saves and they decided that they were going to do what they could to help. But they really wanted to do everything they could to rectify their mistake in causing all of this additional grief and problem for this family, which was awesome, I might add. There we go. So they went ahead, donated a lot of gold. One of the things I'm going to mention specifically here on the video is Rory, the human, the guy who I make fun of constantly because he's a human barbarian. Nevertheless did something very cool, and I wanted to mention this because this will probably come up in the future. He took out, I don't have anything here, the D20 will do. He took out basically his only possession at the time, because Rory had no gold to speak of. I think he had actually 2 gold at this point. He took out one of his only things, which is a single black pearl, and gave it to them. And they said they would go ahead, or he said, one of the two interacted and said, thank you, and they're going to go ahead and make a necklace out of this for the girl, for Iliartia, so that she could have a remembrance of the impact of this meeting and what it meant for her future. Just thought I'd mention that. So the party leaves, feeling ashamed and aghast, and they go and talk to the soldiers who were sent by the distributor and say, we did it. We've done our job. You can verify with them. We're leaving. And they get the hell out of Dodge. Now, originally, when I was planning out how to do this, I was thinking I was going to cut off the point of this recital here. I was going to just be like, yep, that's it. We'll cover what happens next. But I want to go just a tiny bit further, because I want to end this properly. They travel eastwards and a little bit south, exiting the mount. Reversed. Exiting the mountain range properly and heading over into the foothills of the far reach, right? And if they keep going for about 2 more days, they will reach the metropolis of Eldritch. Eldritch is the capital of the Order, and it should be pretty obvious why they're going there, all things considered. It's also pretty much the first thing that came to mind for them to go to, and it has a hub. And while the hub was shut down in Al Jalima for obvious political and war-related concerns, the hub in Eldritch is the most likely one in the entire world to still be up and functional. So, wherever they want to go, that's a good place for them. It is worth noting that the party is kind of adrift at this point, and this is by deliberate intent. I've been kind of leading them around by the nose up to this point with either the guild boards or the orders. But at this point, the party first truly had the real decision of where do we go next, that sort of freedom. That ended up being dialed back in the future by the request, I might add. But I just thought I'd mention that. This is their decision to do this. They head east, and they make camp for the night, and because they're still a little bit on the paranoid side, with good reason, they go ahead and set out some watches to, keep watching in the middle of the night, make sure nothing happens. Why does that refocusing thing keep happening? What if I turn off autofocus? Will that do it? Well, now I gotta, manually focus. Wah! Woo! Wah! Wah! Let's just leave it at that and hope it's good. No, see, now it's like... Let's see if I'm, here. No, it's good. Okay, we're just gonna leave that. I'm recording this through a bit different software, the webcam software, in case anyone's wondering. God, it's dark in here. Anyways, so they leave watch for the night and they start doing their thing, and the people on watch do not roll successfully enough, to put it in such terms, and something comes thundering across the foothills from out of nowhere, bowls them over, knocks them prone, and in one case unconscious, and then grabs Kazrinthka. Well, actually, no, it doesn't grab Kazrinthka. One of its arms is actually better described as this terminating in a long claw, which it stabs straight down through Kazrinthka's torso, her chitinous exoskeleton, grabs her up and lifts her up off of it. And that's where I'm going to end the video for tonight. So hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully I'll be able to do this again. Feel free to let me know about the lighting. Feel free to ask questions as usual about the campaign. I always love questions. And I'll talk to you guys later.